Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Victor Melchor, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to color grade your DJI Osmo Pocket 3 footage using Dehancer Pro in DaVinci Resolve. If you're unfamiliar with Dehancer, it is a really powerful film emulation plugin that you can use to get really nice, pleasing looks out of your footage. And my favorite thing about Dehancer is that it supports a variety of different camera brands and models. So if you want to use it to color grade footage from other cameras, you totally can. And if you are interested in purchasing Dehancer Pro, you can use my promo code VICTOR to get 10% off at the checkout. Now, before we get into the color grading tutorial, let me show you a couple key settings that you'll want to have on your DJI Osmo Pocket 3 before you start shooting. First off, you're going to want to make sure that you have Pro mode turned on. This is going to allow you to change the color profile, and I'm going to recommend you shoot in D-Log-M. This is going to give you a more flat, desaturated image that'll give you much more flexibility for color grading. Also, I do recommend manually setting your white balance. This will prevent your colors from shifting while you're moving into different environments or lighting situations. And I have a super quick white balance tutorial that I'll link in the description if you want to know which temperature to set your camera to. Lastly, for exposure, if you are manually exposing, I would try to expose around -0.3 stops. But if you do want to use auto exposure, which I actually use it a ton, I would recommend setting your ISO range from 50 to 1600 and setting your exposure value around -0.3 stops to save your highlights from clipping. Now let's get to the color grading tutorial. Alright, so now we are in DaVinci Resolve, and I have my first example right here, but real quick, if you are using an Apple device like a MacBook Pro or an iMac, you're going to want to go to File in the top left, scroll down to Project Settings, and you're going to want to make sure that your color science is DaVinci YRGB, and your timeline color space, you're going to want to make sure that you are at Rec 709-A. Once you're done, just click Save, and now let's get into the color grade. Alright, so for this first example, I shot at Disneyland, and we got that nice afternoon lighting, and I wanted some really pleasing, vibrant colors, but I didn't want it to look overly stylized. So now we're going to start at the blank clip, and the very first thing we're going to do is go to the color tab on the bottom, it's this little color wheel. And next, we're going to hold Option and press S 2 times. This is going to give you 3 nodes total, which if you're new to DaVinci Resolve, nodes are essentially like adjustment layers in Adobe Premiere Pro, but they're much better in my opinion. So this first node we'll use for basic color correction. The second node we'll just leave blank just in case we need it. And the third node, this is going to be the node that I'm going to put Dehancer. So next on the top right, I'm going to go to Effects, scroll all the way down, and then I'm going to drag and drop Dehancer Pro to the third node. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm just going to scroll down to Film Grain, which it's automatically enabled, but for the meantime, I'm just going to keep it disabled. Now let's just scroll back up, and then under Input, for Source, we're going to go to Choose Camera. Then we can choose our camera brand, so DJI. And for the camera, it's the Osmo Pocket 3. And now it's D-Log-M. Next thing we're going to do is go back to the very first node, which we're going to use this as the basic corrections. So highlight, shadow, color temperature, stuff like that. So in this first node, I'm going to go down in the bottom left to my primaries, and I'm going to boost the shadows up a bit. 50 looks pretty good to me. That looks good for now, and we're gonna go back to Dehancer. Next, under film, this is where you get to choose your different film stocks, and there is over 67 different film stocks, I believe. Some of my favorite have been the Kodak Portra recently, so I'm gonna use Kodak Portra 160 VC. And as you can tell, it gives it a slightly more flat look, which is a good starting point and a little bit more flat than the Kodak 250D, which is a little bit more punchy and contrasty. Next, we're gonna go down to Developer, and then I'm going to enable it. And the main feature that I use always from Film Developer is Color Boost. So I'm just going to boost up the colors a bit. There we go. Next up is Film Compression, which this is actually really cool because this is like a highlight recovery tool. If you look in the top left corner, once I enable it, it basically brings down my highlights so they don't look like they're as blown out. And if you want to adjust the intensity, you can click Tonal Range and make it more or less intense. But typically the default is good for me. Expand is something I don't really use, but you can adjust your white and your black points. Just gonna reset those. And next up is Film Print, which this is where you get a lot of that stylized look from. You have Cineon Film Log, Fujifilm 3513 Print, Kodak 2383, and then Kodak Glossy Paper, which looks more like a simple Rec 709 look. For this case, I'm going to use Fujifilm 3513, which I already kind of like that look. And as you can tell, the colors are there, it just needs a little bit more work. And if you do want to adjust the exposure a bit, I typically do it in print because I notice it doesn't blow out the highlights as fast as if you adjust the exposure in the input at the top, you're going to lose your highlights super quick. So if you do want to adjust your exposure a bit, I usually just do it in the print, which I boosted it up a tad. It's looking good so far. And then you can make the image more yellow yellow or blue, magenta or green, cyan or red. You can make the shadows and highlights cooler or warmer, which the shadows are looking better when I warm it up. But for now, I'm just gonna disable the color head and I'm gonna go back to where I do my basic corrections. And then under lift, which is the shadows, this little wheel right here. And then I'm gonna drag that little dot to the left to make the shadows more warm. As you can tell, that makes a pretty big difference. And then if you want to undo a change you just made, click Command Z. If you want to redo a change you just made, hold Shift, Command, and press Z. I'm gonna go back to Command Z, and as you can tell, the image looks much more warm and pleasing. I'm gonna drop the color temp a bit to like 120. And this little wheel under lift, I'm going to drag that to the right to make it a little bit brighter. Same thing with the gamma, which is the midtones. I'm gonna drag it to the right to make the image a tad brighter. And then I'm gonna go a little bit above where it says contrast, and I'm going to make that a bit more contrasty. And one last thing, I'm gonna drop the highlights down a bit. That way it doesn't look as crunchy in the top. There we go. I'm gonna boost the contrast up a tad more. And there we go. Now we got our fully color graded image. Before we get to the next example, I'm gonna walk you through the rest of the features of Dehancer. So we have film grain, which if you want film grain, this will add some nice little grain. 8mm will be the most noticeable film grain. And the higher the ISO, the more defined the grain will look. So 8mm at ISO 500 will be the strongest looking grain. If you go to 16mm, it's still pretty noticeable. 35mm will be a little bit more subtle, and 65 at ISO 50 will give you the most subtle looking grain. Next up we have halation, which I'm going to enable that, and it'll be again the most noticeable at 8mm. What this is going to do is if you check that bottom right corner, you're going to notice a warm glow around some of the bright parts of the image. And then what bloom will do is make all the highlights in your image basically have this nice glow. It's not going to be warm, it's just going to be a simple white glow, which that can be cool if you want that look. If you enable film damage, it's basically going to have those scratches that you'll notice when you're watching an old film. Then if you enable film breathe, it's going to add this little flicker to your footage that makes it look even more like film. Next up is gate weave. If you enable it, it's going to crop in on your image a bit and it's going to give it this jitter effect. I'll show you 8mm so you can really see it. Next up is overscan, which if you enable it, it'll essentially give you an overlay that looks like the borders of film. And you have a bunch of different options to choose from at different film stocks. Next up is vignette, which if you enable it, you can get the corners of your frame looking darker. So maybe this will help if you want more focus on the center of the frame. If you do like this look, you can actually generate and export your own LUT with the look that you created. And then lastly is the quality. So you can do high and slow. It's gonna be the best quality, but it's gonna take longer to export, or you can do normal fast, which I use normal fast and I have had no issues so far. All right, for this next example, we shot at Cars Land and it's got a similar look, but a couple different changes I made. And we're back in the color tab. I'm gonna press Option S. I'm gonna press it 3 times so that way we have 4 different nodes. Same thing, the first node is just gonna be my basic correction, and then the second, third node, I'm gonna show you another technique that I also use, and then the 4th node will be Dehancer. So let's just drag and drop Dehancer on. I'll turn my film grain off, and I'm just gonna select my camera again. For my film, I'm gonna scroll down and I'm gonna pick Kodak Portra 400. It's gonna give me a slightly better starting point than Kodak 250D. Next up is Film Developer, which I'll enable, and Color Boost, I'm gonna just adjust it a tad. There we go, that looks good to me. Next up is Film Compression, which I always just like to turn that on. It's gonna bring a little bit more detail into that Flows V8 Cafe sign, as you can tell. And I'll increase the tonal range a little bit so you can get even more detail. Here's before, here's after. Expand, I'm gonna leave alone. And then for the film print, I'm gonna click Kodak 2383. There we go, that already looks pretty good. It just needs some minor adjustments. So now I'm gonna go to node number 1, which is the basic corrections, and I'm gonna boost my color temperature to warm up the image to about 350. And the image looks a little bit more on the magenta side. So under tint, I'm gonna drop it a little bit to make it more green, like negative 3.5 looks pretty good. And my shadows are just a bit too dark. So I'm gonna boost the shadows up to about 32 looks good. I'm gonna drop my highlights just a tad as well. And under lift again, I'm gonna get that little dot and I'm gonna warm up the shadows just a tad. Same with the midtones. I'm gonna adjust the tint a little bit because it's looking a tad too green. That's looking good so far. The one thing I'm noticing is that my greens, they're kind of looking a little too warm and a little too orangey and browny. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to node number 2, just click it. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go down here, click this little dropper icon, and I'm gonna go up to the left corner and where it says highlight, just click that. And with this dropper, I'm gonna select only the green objects. You just keep clicking, and then with these sliders down below, you can kind of adjust it until you get the green parts or the parts that you want to change the colors. Okay, that looks pretty good to me because it's mainly the trees that I wanted to change. And what I'm gonna do is under tint, I'm going to turn the trees more green. As you can tell, before, after. There we go. And the last thing I'm going to do is go to node number 3, which I want to make this Flo's V8 Cafe sign. I just want to make it a little bit more pink. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click the little dropper icon, click highlight, and then I'm going to select the pink, make my adjustments. And the pink part, it's pretty bright in the image, so this is essentially where the highlights are. So what I'm gonna do is go to gain, which is the highlights. So I'm just gonna drag it just a tad to the top and to the right to make it more pink. So now, as you can see that little pink V8 Cafe sign, if I reset it, it looks kind of orange, but then I'm gonna just Command Z to undo, and now it looks a little bit more pink, which I like. And now I got my final image and I got a nice filmic look. Alright everyone, so that's how to color grade your DJI Osmo Pocket 3 footage using Dehancer Pro. And again, if you are interested, you can use my promo code Victor to get 10% off of your purchase, which I'll have it linked in the description. And if you do have any questions, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. Huge thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.